Good Friday morning, friends. Welcome to another episode of Finding God in the Dark, the podcast. I'm Don Stevens,
And I'm Jonathan Campbell. We're glad to be here.
and we're this week we're talking about a new film on Netflix this year called Mary. It is the story of the Mary that, well, we're told you think you know.
Yes.
Um, uh, I think we both have mixed emotions about this one. A couple little details. I didn't, like I don't have all the, usually I have the actors and directors and stuff, but the one person involved in the production of this film that I really wanted to bring their name up is one of the producers,
Hmm.
is Joel Osteen. So
Yes.
you do your own math on that. I'm not a fan, but
Yeah.
that for me, like, I think I mentioned it last week that my wife watched it and she came downstairs and she said, I have questions. Well, I watched it last night.
Yeah.
And after I had finished and I was watching something else, my wife came downstairs and I said to her, I watched the Mary movie. And she said, and? And I said, and I have questions. For instance, who is the target audience for this film?
Well, what's interesting is, and there's got to be some of this you kind of respect, but from I heard an interview with one of I think either the director or one of the producers, not Joel Osteen, and they said that they really wanted to take perspectives about Mary from the Muslim faith, from the Catholic tradition, and from the Protestant tradition, and kind of meld them together. And I thought that was an interesting take because I'm like, you're gonna just kind of aggravate everybody, but okay.
You really are. You just see, because what I wrote was, and this is the first time, I mean, this is how much this film kind of
Yeah,
irritated me, is
yeah,
that I haven't been writing anything down for a long while. I mean, we're almost at episode 40 of this podcast, and I
right.
don't think I've been writing anything down since
Yeah,
maybe episode 10 or 12.
yeah, yeah.
But I had to write myself some notes on this one. Like, is
Yeah.
this a religious film with violence and mayhem? Or is it an action film with religious overtones? Because it tries to be both and accomplishes neither.
Can I explain where I'm coming from
Yeah,
with this?
go, man,
Okay.
go.
Okay, there's a couple things that I'll just talk about things I really liked and
Hmm.
that are kind of issues for me when we come to the Christmas story that I really appreciated about this movie. One is I it drives me nuts in my old age. I'll just claim my old age. I really get bothered. I grew up in a tradition that really basically we I was raised independent Baptist and very fundamentalist,
Hmm.
and pretty much anything that dealt with Mary was kind of poo-pooed. So the my grandfather kind of looked at it and would talk about Mary as God just picked Mary and that was it. You know, that there wasn't any reason, she wasn't special, anything like that. Going to seminary and really loving theologians and traditions and reading about all of this stuff, and even just reading the text of Luke, you cannot make the argument, I would argue, if you read Luke and do some digging and connections it's trying to make to the Old Testament. Luke clearly sees her as special, sees her as however you want to define it, full of grace or favored by God. He clearly, in the conversations with Mary and Elizabeth, when they meet, that community is where the in earlier in the Hebrew text in the Old Testament, the when the Ark of the Covenant was recaptured by David, he holds it in that community where Elizabeth is, later, resident. He
Ein
holds
Karam.
it, yeah, he
Ein
holds
Karam.
it
Yeah, I've
in
been
that,
there.
yeah, he holds it in that community for a while to kind of make sure it's okay. Basically, David's afraid that something's happened to it and it would be bad to bring it directly to Jerusalem. Well, when David arrives, he finds it and then he takes it back to Jerusalem. And the text says he leaps and dances in front of the ark, right?
Right.
That's the exact phrase in Greek, though, that Luke uses to talk about the child in Elizabeth's womb, John, leaping in front of Mary.
Hmm.
And so, yes, this is typology. That's the fancy word for when the Old New Testament writers connect to something in the Old Testament. But I strongly agree with people that say he's trying to make that connection with her being the new ark. So he clearly, when he writes his gospel, sees her as special, sees her as full of grace, sees her as the new ark of the covenant. That Jesus is our new covenant, and she is the ark of that covenant. And so it drives me nuts when Protestants try to act. She's not special. She isn't someone we can learn from. She isn't kind of a person we can look at as a model disciple. Because I think for some Protestants, there's an overreaction to we're uncomfortable with some of the places the Roman Catholic Church goes, so we're just going to denigrate her completely. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good way to handle it.
Throw it all out. Oh, that's
Yeah,
Catholic. Throw it all
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah,
No, we don't.
yeah,
And I agree with you there. That's not a good way to look at it.
yeah.
I certainly agree with that. My challenge with this is that it just takes so much creative license with
Yeah.
the story that again, I don't see where it appeals to anybody.
Well, I think too, a lot of this, not all of it, and I have not read the Gospel of James. The Gospel of James is a book that was not accepted by the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church as sacred text.
Right.
But it's not a new book. It was written probably in the second century, so
Mhm.
it's 1800 years old. It's part of an early Christian tradition. And a lot of the stuff about Joachim, her father, and
Yeah.
Anna, and putting her in the temple as a worker in the temple, all of that's in the Gospel of James. And so they didn't pull it out of anywhere. They pulled it out of a
Right.
Christian tradition.
Yeah.
It's just not something that's been recognized. The problem I don't have a problem with that as much, but I do think you have to recognize that even though that's part of and it has shaped the tradition of especially the Orthodox community and the Catholic community, how they see Mary, they don't even recognize it as sacred scripture. So you have to hold. I think you have to hold it more gently than they hold it.
It is the Gospel of James, or the
Yeah.
proto evangelion of
Yeah.
James,
Mhm.
the infancy Gospel of James, is yeah, it's one of the non-canonical Gospels. We talked a little bit about those last week, right? It is the primary source, as I understand it, at least, of a lot of the veneration of Mary.
It's
And
a it's some
it,
it's some
it
footing
also
to it. Yeah.
establishes that idea of Mary's perpetual virginity even
Virginity. Yes.
after she's given birth.
Yes. Yes.
Because
And
this,
what
I
the,
did read a synopsis. I didn't read the
No,
whole.
I've never read it myself. In fact, it makes me curious to read it. What I tell folks at my church that I think people need to recognize is that Wesley, Luther, and Calvin believe she was a perpetual virgin. So this is something you can believe and still be a Protestant. It's not something that we have a set doctrine on as the Methodist Church, but it's also something that you could believe if you wanted to. The founder of our movement did. So, you know, um,
Okay.
you
Well,
know, so it's one of those things where it's not something that I don't think it's a big deal about if you believe this somehow you're bad or I don't think or you're not a Protestant because again Wesley was a Protestant. Uh, you know, well I did a lot of this a couple weeks ago when I talked about Mary in my sermon. It's funny, but there are five doctrines that you're called to believe if you're Roman Catholic, okay, about Mary, Marian doctrines. if you want to be in good standing. Of course, there are a lot of Catholics that don't believe doctrines, just like there's a lot of Methodists that don't believe in stuff we affirm, right? So let's be honest, right? So these five are that Mary is the Theotokos, which means she's the mother of God. Um, that she was a virgin. That's number two. That she was perpetually a virgin. That's the third doctrine. Um, that she that she was and they talk about this a little bit in the movie. They don't use the term, but that she was immaculate conception conceived, which
Yes, she was. Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
most Protestants, when I say, and I even did this when I did the sermon, I said, if I told you Immaculate Conception, you're thinking Jesus, but that's not what we're talking about. The Immaculate
That's
Conception, the doctrine
right.
of the Immaculate Conception is that Mary was born without original sin. And then the fifth one is that she was assumed either at death or right before death into heaven, her body. And what I point out to people is we as Methodists affirm the first two, that she's Theotokos, she's the mother of God, because we believe Jesus is God, right?
Hmm.
And we believe that she was a virgin. That's something we affirm because that's the creeds that are in our hymnal.
Right.
And our founder believed that she was a perpetual virgin. We're not required to believe that, but he believed that, so you could be a faithful Methodist, I guess, and still believe it.
Okay.
Um, and then the other two are doctrines that are unique to the Roman Catholic tradition. Um, so those two are unique to them. Um, the Orthodox Church believes that her accepting the call to be the new Ark of the New Covenant, to be Jesus's mother, that Jesus essentially purifies her of sin. So, they see it a little differently. They feel like the vessel was cleaned out by Jesus, and not that she was never with original sin. And then the last one is the often called the Dormition of Mary. Um, and the Orthodox Church, I don't believe, has a set doctrine about it that you have to believe, but they're open to people believing it. Um, and I think what's important for us to recognize is we may find those two doctrines, the idea of her immaculate being conceived and also her ascension into heaven as weird, but you can read scripture full of grace. You can say, well, what does full of grace mean? And Catholic theologians argue that means that she was without sin. So that's their basis of that doctrine. And then in Revelation 12 talks about a woman clothed in glory, um, in heaven, attacked by the dragon, which is clearly in Revelation Satan, and talks about this woman in heaven giving birth. And it's not a crazy read to say that she's giving birth to the Messiah. It's not a crazy read that it might be Mary. So those doctrines for them, they find that scriptural connection in those places. I'm not saying you have to believe them. You don't have to believe them to be a Methodist in good standing or Protestant in good standing. But what I like to remind Protestants is sometimes we're told that Catholic beliefs are crazy and kind of out of nowhere, and I don't like that because they have basis in
Right.
scripture and reality,
Sure.
whether you like them or not. You can have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in similar places there. There were parts of this as well, like um, they take what has traditionally been a very used in Protestant and Catholic churches,
Mhm.
right? A scripture is very common this season is
Yeah,
Mary's Magnificat, right?
yeah,
And in this film, they boil it down to like, okay,
yeah,
let's go. Like,
yeah,
dude, that's a whole thing. You could have
yeah.
stretched that out a little bit.
Well, and what's interesting is I mean, most people oftentimes will roll into um, Christmas Eve services and they'll hear it. Sometimes it's sung, and most of us don't listen to the words because it's about justice, it's about God making things right, it's about earthly kind of fixing the problems of injustice and inequality. And I think some people don't listen to the words because, I think if you were just to stand up and preach that as a pastor and didn't connect it to Luke, most people would be like, yeah, you're a little too far out there.
Um, there was also one other thing that struck me,
Yeah,
and that is there's this pop culture dynamic,
yeah,
okay, where they create these, in films, they'll create a strong female character,
yeah,
and all of a sudden that female character will have all of the powers and even better than anyone who's practiced it for years and years. Like the primary example is probably Rey in the Star Wars films.
yeah,
Okay. And what they call that is she's a Mary Sue.
yeah, yeah.
Mary here felt like a Mary Sue. You know what I mean?
Definitely some points, absolutely.
It's
Um,
particularly like you get to the end of the fire scene and she's jumping off the
yeah,
building. I'm like,
yeah,
come on.
yeah.
Come on.
Well, the three things I'll talk about the three things I really liked about this movie because a lot of the movies
Do
about
that.
the nativity don't have these elements, and I actually always talk about them when I do Advent, and so I
Mhm.
really like the fact that they were in here. One, that Mary is special. The text points her out as special,
Right.
and the text lifts her up as kind of this archetype disciple that we should learn from and follow. And it really bothers me when Protestants poo-poo, looking at her the way they look at Moses or something like that. And I
Mhm.
really struggle with if you're going to draw guidance from David or from Moses, then you should be drawing guidance from Mary. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Okay.
But
Fair.
the other two things are they really, this was because Anthony Hopkins probably got this thing made, but you know, um, Herod,
He was
yeah,
like his presence. I
yeah,
give him credit
yeah,
because his portrayal of Herod in this
yeah.
film is terrifying.
Yes. Well, and that's my second point is Herod is a huge figure in the story
Hmm.
and has this huge presence over the story. And in most nativity stories, most movies about the nativity, he's this side character that you barely hear about. He was this force in the Galilee and in Judea at the time. He was
Sure.
this menacing force. He was a genius, architectural genius. I mean, full stop. There's no question about that. He got fresh water and filled and built and filled an Olympic-sized swimming pool in the middle of the desert. And he figured out with his engineers how to get that done. The reality is he is an architectural genius. He also was a paranoid crazy man who killed his wife and his son and
Hmm.
who the terrorized people that he thought was against him. He was just a horrible despot,
Yeah.
and usually we skip over him, but his presence is just throughout this text if you read the Bible. And I love the fact that in this movie he was that figure of kind of just hanging over the movie. So I love that aspect of it too, because usually you don't get that.
Yeah. And I mean, usually what we get from Herod is, um, I need a tax, do a census,
Yeah,
kill all the infants. That's
yeah,
like all you get.
yeah,
And certainly in this film, he is a lot more. And like I said, Anthony Hopkins nails it.
yeah,
That I can appreciate.
yeah.
Go ahead, yet another one.
And then the last one is that the murder of the innocents. Usually, when we tell this story, we don't talk about that at all. But this idea of terror and fear is baked into the biblical story. And the Bible wants you the writers of the Bible want you to struggle with this idea of violence and this idea of chaos that's in the midst of this community in which Jesus is born. And this is honestly the first movie about Mary and Joseph I've ever seen that really brings the terror. Yes, sometimes they go overboard. Mary's jumping off of roofs, and and there's huge fires there. The reality is they pump up the action, but at the same time, I appreciate the fact that because what I tell people when I preach through Advent, I'm like, this is a messy story with dark points and dark edges, and we usually whitewash it and pretty it up so we can put a manger scene up in our house. But the story has real ugliness and darkness to it.
And that it I think it may, and maybe that's one of my challenges with this film, is that I think in parts it really does go too far with
Mm,
that,
yeah.
um to the detriment of the story. And
Mm,
that's a problem, because if you're making, well, one, if you're making this for religious people, they're not going to appreciate the violence.
yeah.
If you're making it to bring secular people to the faith,
Yeah.
they're going to be kind of over, like, you're overwhelming them with everything else.
Yeah.
So I don't, to me, this film doesn't strike that balance anywhere. Um, it's challenging. The other part of that is that historically we know, for instance, that the whole relationship with Joseph is not what this film portrays.
Yeah.
That Mary, if this is from the Gospel of James, right?
Yeah.
And if we were going to take that at least partially as,
Yeah.
some kind of witness,
Yeah.
that Mary was working in the temple, that
Yeah.
she was a virgin,
Yeah.
and that the problem was they feared that she was approaching her, starting to get her menstrual cycle,
Mhm.
and they thought that that would, make the temple unclean.
Yeah.
So they had her betrothed to Joseph, an older man,
Mhm.
to live outside the temple.
Yeah.
Um, but this, they turned it into a romance
Yeah.
and an action story.
Well,
So
and I think what's interesting is you can tell if your Koresh, your manger scene was designed by a Catholic or a Protestant, because the Catholic versions usually have an older Joseph, and the Protestant versions have a younger
younger
Joseph.
Joseph, yeah.
Um, Now, most likely, if we're just, and granted, nobody has hard data on this, but if we're
Yeah.
just like throwing dice on what's more likely, most likely, Mary was 13 or 14, maybe 15. People usually married off daughters when they started menstruating. That's just the reality of it.
Hmm.
It's this idea of becoming a woman, right? And then the other piece of this is usually the 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 usually the husbands were a little bit older, eh, so that they could be established, so they would have a profession, so they could take care of a wife. And so what I tell people is most likely if you're playing the odds, she was probably a freshman, he was a senior. Like if we're putting it in terms of our day, but we're looking at probably someone in who was 18 and someone who's like 14 or 15. Like that's what we're probably talking about. Um, the Catholic tradition, some of it has gone to the idea that he was like a 90-year-old man who was asked to take care of this young girl, and nobody thought he would ever want to have sex with her, so he was safe. I, you know, I don't think you need to believe that. I don't, if you want to believe that she was a perpetual virgin, I have no problem with that, but I don't think you have. The problem I have with the Catholic Church is those five doctrines. I have no problem with any of those doctrines. I have a problem that you force people to believe, especially the last three. The last two, I don't have a problem if you say you need to believe these because they are part of Scripture, and but the other three are things that developed in tradition, and I don't think they're bad things to believe, but I don't think you should require people to believe them either. That's kind of my opinion.
And as a good Wesleyan Methodist,
Yeah.
we put the scripture first, right?
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
we still consider the tradition,
Oh,
but if the
absolutely.
scripture contradicts it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
we are not solo scriptural people. We don't believe scripture alone, but we believe what's usually called prima scriptura, which is the idea is scripture is primary. Scripture.
right.
So yeah, the idea is that tradition matters to us as Methodists, but we believe that we still start with the scripture and make sure the scripture balances what the tradition has, how the tradition has developed.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, those elements I really liked. You know, again, they're part of the story that we often downplay, and so I really resonated with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, and so in that exercise, I don't have a huge problem with it. And to be honest, I don't really mind that they use the Gospel of James. It is a Christian text that's very early. It's not scripture, but it's not like they made it out of whole cloth. I think what
Well,
bothered,
it's scripture in the sense that it is
yeah,
this
it,
story, but it's
yeah,
not biblical. It's
yes,
not canonical.
it's not canonical. It isn't considered by any tradition that I know of to be in the same level that they would put the
Yeah.
other books of the Bible that we have.
Right.
Um, you know, it's not even listed in the. It's not even listed for Catholic. If folks don't know, the Catholic Church has seven additional books of the Bible.
The
That
Apocrypha.
the Apocrypha, they usually go with the Deuterocanonical because Apocrypha means hidden and it implies that these aren't important. You know, so those seven books of the Bible are intertestamental. They're the stuff that's between the Old Testament and the New Testament. But even the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church that have those additional texts and view them as Holy Scripture and inspired, they do not include the Gospel of James in that category. So even for them, they would argue it's not on the same level as as books of the Bible.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was looking on my shelf right here
Mhm.
for something to kind of think about what what this film meant, and I came up with this. Um, I don't know if you can
See
I
it?
don't know if you can read the bottom there, but
Yeah,
this is the Marian Bible,
yeah,
right? So it is a regular Bible,
yeah,
but there's this whole section in the front that is all just about Mary.
yeah.
Now it doesn't include the Gospel of James
No,
any more than I mean you would think if there was going to be a Bible published that would include the Gospel of James, it'd be this one.
yeah,
It doesn't. Um, so that's fascinating.
yeah,
Um, anyway, like bottom line for me on this film, I would, I mean, if I'm making a recommendation, I would say approach it with caution.
yeah,
It's not, I don't know, it's an okay film.
yeah.
I actually watched another film last night that I liked better.
Yeah.
But it's and like you say, there's some things that we can
Absolutely.
certainly take from it and learn from it.
Yeah.
If we're willing to do the legwork, right? And
Yeah.
understand what it means. I
Yeah.
think that they've the problem there is that so few people know the stuff we've just talked about,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And and then on top of that, they've taken creative license with it,
Yeah.
and added in all of these encounters with Gabriel and the devil and all of this stuff
Yeah.
and all of the action and the violence. And so now, I think here's the danger. You come to a film like this, now how much of this do I believe? You
Yeah.
know? And if I start throwing out parts because I can't find any reason for it, then what do I do with that?
Yeah.
Like then I'm going to throw out the whole film. Then the whole film has no merit, and that's a problem too.
Yeah.
So I think it's the kind of film that if you're going to watch it, might deserve more research.
Yeah. I would encourage people. to watch it if they're interested, and because it's interesting about adding these dimensions to it. I think the bigger thing for me is I'm gonna make a book recommendation. There is a book, I'm not exactly sure what it's called. I believe it's called Protestant Perspectives on Mary, and it's edited by Dr. Beverly Gavinta. She taught at Princeton at the time that I was there. And I do one of my peeves, I guess, is that I do feel like Protestants often really downplay Mary, and I don't think that's fair to her in terms of scripture or tradition. And um, there's nothing wrong with the idea of honoring her or the idea of learning from her or holding her up as a, kind of the ideal disciple or one of the ideal disciples. And I think Protestants do a disservice when we try to act like she's nothing special, because that's not being truthful to the tradition of the text either. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to look it up, but I
yeah,
didn't see it that quickly. I mean,
yeah,
there's other articles there, but I didn't see the book.
yeah.
So anyway, I think ideally approach it with caution. It's an interesting film.
Mm,
I wouldn't put it as the best
no,
biblical film I've seen.
no.
Um, and obviously one hitch in my giddy up at right from the get go was the producer, but that's a whole other story. Um,
Oh yeah, we could talk for a long time about Joel
yeah,
Osteen.
well, I mean, we
That's
want to
not
do a
this
whole
podcast.
episode on the prosperity gospel. We can go there, but not today.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, um, so as far as next week, now next week will be after Christmas.
Mhm.
Do we want to move away from Christmas films, or we want to do one last one?
I think you should do one last one. Why don't we?
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I haven't really, as you mentioned before we started filming, it's supposed to be my turn to
Yeah,
pick,
yeah, it is.
and I have not really thought about it, other than there is one film that's also on Netflix, um, that I have not watched yet.
Okay.
Have you seen That Christmas?
No.
So it's right here,
Okay.
animated film,
Animated film. Okay.
on on Netflix. It's new this year, so I haven't seen it. Don't know what it's about.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a look at that since it's
Yeah.
new?
I will give a really brief recommendation because I thought it was a really good film. If you are one of those people that strongly believes Die Hard is a Christmas movie, then you should watch Carry On Netflix because
Last night.
it is a very good it's a very good junk action movie. So
It's exactly what it's. That's the other film I watched last night.
yeah,
My daughter had watched it and she said,
yeah,
I don't think it was that good. I didn't
yeah,
like it. And then I saw it. Well, let me watch. I
yeah,
like Taron Egerton.
yeah.
Let me see. Right.
I thought it was great.
It was fun. It was a fun movie. It
Yeah, yeah,
wasn't, look, it wasn't great. It wasn't high filmmaking,
no,
but it was fun.
yeah,
And I don't ask, I'm really not hard to please when it comes to action movies,
yeah.
honestly. So, yeah, that one was fun. I'm with you on that. I watch it. It's fun. Um, okay, so next week, then we will watch That Christmas. That is
Mhm.
on Netflix. Um, just a heads up for those who've been following along. We are working on not next week's episode, but the following week, we may have a special guest with us who has
Cool.
not appeared with us previously.
Awesome.
And we are very excited about that, but we're going to keep that cat in the bag for right now and see what happens. But
Jesus is joining us.
would it be saying too much if I were to say it is no, I can't say that. I'm
No,
not even gonna
don't give it away. That's the fun
don't
of
give it
it.
away. All right. Friends, until next week, thank you all for watching. Keep on finding God in the dark. Take care and God bless.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're enjoying these discussions, please consider hitting the like button down below or subscribing to follow along. We put out weekly episodes on Friday mornings, And we are so glad that you're finding this discussion of theology and film entertaining enough to follow along with us. Take care and God bless, friends.